Feudal Europe was a social system that developed in medieval Europe during the Middle Ages, which lasted from the 5th to the 15th century. Feudalism was a decentralized system of government in which power was distributed among a hierarchy of lords and vassals. At the top of this hierarchy was the king, who was the ultimate source of authority. However, the king's power was limited by the fact that he could only exercise it with the assistance of his nobles. The king granted his nobles land in exchange for their loyalty and military service. These nobles then divided their land among lesser nobles and peasants in exchange for their loyalty and labor. So feudalism was all about giving and getting. Giving military service and loyalty in exchange for land and protection. But this system had its drawbacks. For example, there was no real way to enforce the king's laws or collect taxes. The king was at the mercy of his nobles, and if they chose to rebel, there was nothing he could do about it. And when the king went to war, he had to rely on his nobles to provide him with soldiers. But often they refused, leaving the king with an army that was too weak to win battles. Also, while the system worked well in rural areas, it didn't work so well in urban areas. There were no cities in feudal Europe, only towns, and the towns were usually quite small. Feudalism also led to a lot of poverty and misery for the peasants who had no rights and were at the mercy of their lords. But despite its many drawbacks, feudalism lasted for over 1,000 years in Europe. So what kept it going for so long? One reason was that it worked pretty well most of the time. The nobles were content with their lot in life and didn't want to rock the boat. They knew that if they rebelled against the king, they would probably lose their heads. And the peasants were too poor and powerless to do anything about their miserable condition. But perhaps the most important reason why feudalism lasted for so long is because it was a very adaptable system. Feudalism was able to change and evolve along with the times. For example, as cities began to grow in size and importance, the feudal system changed to reflect that. New laws were passed to regulate trade and commerce, and the power of the nobility began to decline as the power of the merchant class grew. In addition to its political and economic advantages, feudalism also had some significant cultural achievements. During the High Middle Ages, which lasted from the 10th to the 13th century, Europe experienced a period of economic growth and cultural flourishing. This was due in part to the stability that feudalism provided, but also because of the introduction of new technologies and the increased flow of trade. During this time, great cathedrals were built, universities were founded, and many works of art and literature were created. So, to sum up, feudalism was a complex and multifaceted system that had both positive and negative aspects. It was a highly adaptable system that was able to change and evolve along with the times, which is one of the reasons why it lasted for so long. Feudalism was a decentralized system of government in which power was distributed among a hierarchy of lords and vassals. Feudalism also led to a lot of poverty and misery for the peasants who had no rights and were at the mercy of their lords. Now let's move on to the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was the eastern half of the Roman Empire that survived the fall of Rome in 476 CE and lasted until 1453 CE. Unlike feudal Europe, the Byzantine Empire was highly centralized, with the emperor holding all the power. The emperor's power was not limited by any nobles or lords, and he was able to maintain control over his vast empire through a system of bureaucracy. The Byzantine Empire was also more urban than feudal Europe. Its cities were home to a large percentage of the population and were centers of trade and commerce. The capital city of Constantinople was one of the largest and richest cities in the world. Unlike feudalism, which was based on the ownership of land, the Byzantine economy was based on trade and commerce. The Byzantine merchants were some of the richest people in the empire, and they enjoyed a high standard of living. The Byzantine Empire was also more tolerant of different religions than feudal Europe. While there was still a lot of anti-Semitism and persecution of Christians in both places, the Byzantines were more open to cultural and religious diversity. This was partly because the Byzantine Empire was ruled by a single religion, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, while feudal Europe was ruled by a patchwork of different local customs and traditions. In conclusion, The Byzantine Empire was a highly centralized, urban and cosmopolitan state that was the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire. In contrast, feudalism was a decentralized, rural and traditional way of organizing society that developed in medieval Europe. While both the Byzantine Empire and feudalism were products of their time, they represented different ways of organizing power, economy, and culture. The Byzantine Empire was a highly sophisticated and advanced civilization that preserved classical Roman learning and made significant contributions to art, architecture, and literature. Feudalism, on the other hand, was a more rigid and hierarchical system that emphasized obedience and loyalty to one's lord. Both the Byzantine Empire and feudalism played important roles in shaping the course of European history. The Byzantine Empire provided a model for later medieval states, and its cultural achievements laid the foundation for the Renaissance. Feudalism, meanwhile, had a profound impact on the social and political structure of medieval Europe, and its legacy can still be seen today in our legal and political systems. And that's the end of part 2. See you next time.